Awesome. Okay. So I've just started recording. So for everyone who is getting to watch this back, and remember, you guys will have access to this forever, so you can always watch it back at any point. We're going to obviously have a range of, toddlers, so toddler sleep issues, and then obviously baby sleep issues. And so I will be covering as much as I possibly can in the next sort of hour. So thank you for joining me and or watching this back and yeah, allowing me to play this role and be a part of your parenting journey. Just a quick overview of myself and how got into this space, just so you know who you're somewhat trusting. For those of you who may not follow or may not have heard. So I have been working with families for nearly 18 years now, which is kind of a little bit daunting, but for a really long time in the baby, children, and parenting sort of space. I actually started off as a nanny and then went overseas nannying and then came back to study at university and went and did registered nursing and specialized in pediatrics. My mum is she is a long-time pediatric nurse. She leaves me for dust. That is how I got into that. And then from pediatric nursing, I then had my daughter Scarlett, who's now 10. And honestly, guys, like she was a CMPI babe, reflux, so unsettled. Oh, it was such a nightmare. And sleep was non-existent. And honestly, 10 years ago, like sleep consultants, I'd never heard of one. And it was actually a friend of mine that recommended. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I would love to do if I was, a sleep consultant essentially. But I also at the same time were like, oh boy, like this is, this whole sleep thing is so much for parents to navigate. And so I then went and studied, trained, and yeah, it's been 9 years now that I've been working with families around the world. We have a beautiful team. Our team are all pediatric health experts, and have significant backgrounds in health and peds. So yeah, so that's just a bit about us and how this all came about. So I have been in many positions that can really empathize with parents. So I love to talk a little bit, obviously, on the parenting side of things. So boundaries, connection, that sort of thing when we come into that toddlerhood part, but obviously primarily sleep. So for our baby section of the sleep, now guys, if you have got a toddler, and the baby section, just think if you might have another, it might be short, but if you might have another, or you might be trying for another little one, take notes, keep this recording, watch it back. If, however, you've got a baby and you're thinking, oh, the toddler stuff isn't really relevant, I can assure you it will be on your doorstep very soon. And it's great to have that in your back pocket when it comes around, I can assure you. So, yeah, so when we talk about babies, what I tend to sort of love to sort of touch on is when it comes to structuring, be that daytime structuring or that sort of period. Now, I'm just going to quickly take 1 second to jump in and just 3. Yeah, so I can't see or hear anyone, but if you want me to see or hear you, please let me know. I'm happy to take you off, and I will ask for some questions at the end as well. But I will also keep an eye on this chat as we're sort of going along and sort of going between each section, so to speak. So yeah, so when it comes to little ones, I love when we talk about structures for parents. The best way for me to give you an idea is that I tend to encourage that the earlier naps of the day are essentially the ones that tend to be the longer naps, and then as the day goes on, the later naps of the day tend to be more of your cat naps. I don't typically recommend just capping naps, so like nap one, for example, just because. So I don't like the idea of like waking a baby up from nap one to try and, encourage another nap. Two, that might be a bit better. If your little one is 9 to 10 months or under, and guys, this isn't newborns. So if you've got a 3-month-old and under, you can definitely learn lots today, but don't apply things. That's totally different. And for the most part, most of my daycare fams, we're not sort of talking about newborn space. So basically from 3 to 9 or 10 months, your first and second nap, we tend to want to be an hour or more. That's in an ideal world. Now, I'm completely aware that I'm speaking to parents who might have little ones in daycare and how to navigate that. And so don't worry, none of this is going to be unrealistic. I'm going to sort of say, listen, these are your ideals. But at the same time, I don't want you to feel stress or pressure. Take or leave what sort of suits you. But the nap one and two, they're the ones you want to put a bit of fake focus on. They're the ones that little ones tend to go down a little bit easier for, and also would more naturally sort of want to extend. The reason I don't sort of recommend capping that one, like some people sort of cap it after 20 or 30 minutes, is because the more sleep that your little ones get in the earlier part of the day, the more it buffers their later part of the day. And for a lot of little ones, they don't necessarily fit like a stringent structure. So some people are like aiming for 2 hours on nap two, and that becomes like their Bible, or they're aiming for a 7 a.m. wake up. But really, what I like to say is, okay, here's sort of our awake times. Here's our broad, structure. A lot of little ones will wake between 5:30 and 7:30, and they're due to go down between 5:30 and 7:30, approximately. Sorry, between 6 and 7:30 p.m., for example, approximately. And so when we have this sort of general idea around things, and then we get a general awake time. So I sort of say with awake times, have an understanding of the awake time for that little one, for your little one's age. So, for example, I might be like, okay, they're coming up to 7 months. They're due, their awake time might sit around the 2 hour, 2 hours just over, sort of awake time. Then what I recommend is keeping an eye on them just before that period of time, and what you're looking for with the awake times. And this is sometimes you can read them, and sometimes for some little ones you can't. So don't be disheartened. We work with little ones all the time where the parents are like, I genuinely can't read them, and it's okay. We can completely still, get them on the right structuring. So we sort of at that point would be like looking for a calm before the storm. So say they're due to go down at about that 2 hour mark or just over. I would look just before that, and what I'd be looking for is a loss of eye contact. They're trying to avoid, what you're showing them. They've lost interest in their toys, that sort of thing. So they've really sort of lost interest in what they're sort of doing in that moment, right? So we're looking for that bit of a calm before the storm and going then. By the time that you're often seeing those real irritable signs, sometimes that can be on the later side. Now, if it's daycare, what I sort of say is if you can tell the uh, directors, or I can't even think, the educators, I was trying to think of the word. If you can tell the educators they woke up at this time, they're due at that time, or your educators, a lot of the times they will start to get used to, certain times that your little ones go down. That can be really helpful for daycare sleep, to be able to encourage those day naps if we know that they're not getting too overtired. Now, sometimes for daycare naps, especially if your little one is struggling with extending daycare naps in particular, but you know that they could typically do it, sometimes it's worth telling the educators to put them down just a little bit earlier than what you usually would, so a little bit sooner, because they're so overstimulated, and there's a lot more that happens at daycare than sometimes obviously what's happening at home, right? So sometimes just going that little bit sooner can be really helpful. So in terms of day structuring in general, with aiming for nap 1 and 2 to get that little bit longer, anything more than an hour, so it's an hour and 15. If they do a 2 hour nap, that's great. If they wake at 5:30 to 7:30, that's great. You don't have to have them waking at 7 o'clock. And then essentially what I recommend is always trying to keep their naps for as long as you can. So not rushing that nap structure to move forward to the next one. The reason why is because, especially when you've got little ones that are getting really tired by the end of the day, or bedtime can't fall too early because you're getting home from work or things like that, keeping the larger amount of naps that they might be on for longer. So, buying yourself a little bit more time with the longer amount of naps really helps when they drop naps for it not to affect the nighttime sleep. And so, what we tend to find is that if you can keep, for example, if your little one is on 3 naps a day, trying to keep the third nap for a little bit longer, you'd add more awake time if they're showing signs that they're dropping it. You might just get it in the car or pram. They might just have it on the way home, for example. It might just be a short 20-minute kip in the carrier, that sort of thing, for that third nap where possible, right? Same with if you've got a little one who's on 2 naps a day, same idea. Trying to keep the second nap for as long as possible, as long as you're not having to cap earlier naps to under an hour, as long as it doesn't push bedtime past sort of 7:30, 7:45. And as long as you can actually get it, right? So I wouldn't be trying to get like the third nap or the second nap and it's now like 5 p.m. If it's, you've got no more room left. So keeping that in mind, right? So that we could still actually, if we did get that later nap, still get them at least that 20-minute sort of little kip. But what I'm sort of the point I'm making is not to rush to drop naps in general, right? And I'm going to talk more on this because it's really important in terms of things that can make us drop them too soon. If your little one is on one nap a day and you've got a toddler, great. Trying to keep that. Now, that's a very broad range. So, toddlers can actually drop their nap from 2 years. When somebody comes to me and says my 2 year old's like just 2 year old is ready to drop their nap, I would always be questioning a few things first. So, if you've got a little one who drops their naps really soon or much sooner than others, what I would say is, how are their sleep habits in general? What's their sleep like in general? Are they frequent night waking? Are they running the show if they're toddlers? Have your bedtimes become shambles, that sort of thing? So, I'd first address like what's the general hygiene around sleep for our little ones and looking at that first. Have we tried a car nap, for example? So for a lot of 2 year, 3 year old, 2 years and 3 month olds and beyond, so just over that 2 year mark, they won't take their nap in their sleep space anymore, be that bed or cot. If they do, amazing. But a lot of little ones from that time onwards won't. And that's really age appropriate. And we don't want to keep pushing, because here's the deal: when we are trying to push for like something, that midday nap to happen for too long, and they're getting too old for it now, they're over 2.5, for example, we just keep trying to get them to go into their cotton bed and it keeps failing and they keep getting out, it ends up causing then like seeping into that nighttime settle as well, because they're just learning they're going to muck around. It becomes a really angsty time for everyone. So we have to recognize, okay, at these points, these are when we're ready to drop. This is, what I might be looking for. Okay, well, we're just going to do a car nap for a little while or a walk in the pram or whatever we can, but trying not to drop too quickly. And again, if you've got a toddler who is, for example, showing signs that they're ready to drop, so bedtime's falling really late, every time they sleep, it's a nightmare, that sort of thing, there's no worries in dropping it. But there's something that I want you guys to check first. So, what I am going to say, when it first comes to nap transitions, I'm going to do a couple of drawings for you guys today. Lucky everybody. I always have a joke that I am a terrible drawer. I am. It's not even a joke. I genuinely, oh, that pen doesn't work. Thank you very much, children. But I'm a terrible drawer, but that's okay, because hopefully it's still super helpful. So if we have a little one that's on 3 naps a day, so there's our 3 naps at the top, the lines, the 3 naps, right? And suddenly that little one drops this third nap. We've then got this big gap to fill before bedtime, right? So what we want to do is we want to move our naps out a little bit. So the first nap falls a bit later, the second nap falls a bit later, and then we've got bedtime. That's the same with if your little one was on 2 naps a day. Excuse my, it's probably not even now. And suddenly they've dropped that later nap of the day, which, guys, by the way, that's why I don't recommend making nap one particularly short, because it's always the last nap of the day that drops. So eventually your nap one is the one that actually moves often into the one nap a day. Now, if you've done it the other way around, it's fine. But I'm just sort of giving you that idea while we're here. So when that drops, the idea is that we want to span out their naps enough so that we're buffering this bedtime period. And the reason is if your little one is used to 3 naps or 2 naps and they're used to going to bed, and especially if you've got a little one at daycare and early bedtimes are just quite tricky, if your little one's used to going to bed at that 7:30 p.m. mark, you can imagine if second nap is then suddenly finishing by 2 p.m. and you've then got this huge stretch to reach bedtime, and you go, okay, well, it's 4 hours at 6 o'clock, let's put them down. Often they will be like, no chance, buddy. I am not used to a 6 p.m. bedtime. I think it's the third nap you're trying to get me to go into my cot for, all the things, right? And so then you get a really difficult bedtime. So you actually are often, now, for some little ones, they won't, it's like a blip. They won't notice it. You'll drop their last nap, they'll go to bed earlier, and it won't be an issue. If your little one, when they drop a nap, starts refusing sleep or having lots of night waking or especially early morning waking, that's when you have to start looking at, well, have I spanned these naps across the day well enough so that bedtime, for example, is just falling closer to 7 or that sort of thing, So making sure that you sort of, you make sure that you basically just making sure you span it so that bedtime is falling not too early all of a sudden, but there's not this huge stretch. So I hope that makes sense. That's why you'd move it to the middle of the day. That sort of, you'd move it out slowly, right? And sometimes it's just a matter of buying yourself 2 weeks, and it makes a huge difference as well. So that's what I want you guys to know about naps. Now, the next thing is if you find that your little one is ever looking at, you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're just refusing their sleep. I'm not sure if they're ready to drop. They've dropped all of their sleeps too soon. My toddler has become just this nightmare at bedtime. Um, and so is it that, my toddler is ready to drop their one nap of the day? Now, the toddler dropping to no naps, essentially, we don't want to rush that. That is not fun for anyone when we rush it. However, there's something called sleep pressure. If you follow me, you probably know about it. Okay. And what we want to know about that sleep pressure, I'm just going to check if there's any questions, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. I will ask in a moment. Okay. So the chats, I don't really know how to change the chat. But don't worry, when you guys ask questions, I'll read them out. And if I forget, please remind me to do them. Sometimes as I'm reading them, I get so engrossed in the question, I forget to read them out. Okay, so there's this thing called sleep pressure. And it matters a lot. It doesn't just matter for babies. It doesn't just matter for naps. It matters for settles. It matters for nighttime. It matters for babies. It matters for toddlers. This is our 6-month-old's awake time. It comes to about 2 hours, maybe just under, right? In this 6-month-old's awake time, this little one is refusing naps or, showing signs that they're ready to drop naps super soon, or having hard night settles. What I want you guys to look at is what I love doing is running a bit more of a feed, play, sleep. Now, you don't have to do that, but even if you're feeding close to sleep, what I want you to pay attention to is how much of their awake time is spent awake and expending their energy and building an appetite for sleep, or how much is in fact the opposite. How much are they getting rest or downtime or that sort of thing and losing that appetite for sleep? So say, for example, your little one has their feed here and it's a 10-minute feed. They're 6-month-old now. They're done in 10 minutes. And they got all this space to build up sleep pressure, ready to go down again. But imagine if they've spent this awake time, they've had a bit of a snack feed here, bit of a snack feed there, maybe one more little snack or a feed closer to bedtime. We can see how much less awake time they had to expend that energy. And you can also see that sometimes feeding right before sleep or a pram walk or a car trip, which I get is unavoidable, but we can do things to keep them more alert. But we can see how that's like, well, your car trip when you get home and you're like, they're going to be stuffed. They've had kindy, gym or whatever it is. And then we get them in the door and they almost reboot and they are just another level or they refuse to go down. That's the good old chill before the sleep part. So toddlers, guys, just give me 1 second, just 1 second. My little one's just come, not my little one, my big one's just coming in to say goodnight. Sorry, guys. Alrighty. So basically, if you've got a toddler, what we want to be looking at is, say they're due to go to bed and we're like, yeah, they've had plenty of awake time. It's 7:30 p.m. But we pop them in front of the TV right before bedtime, or they sit in their little couch and have their sippy cup of milk right before bedtime. Excuse my drawing. It's actually quite hard to do it this way. Right before bedtime. That piece is exactly what then causes this really shitty second wind to come into play. We're like, okay, milk away. You're all nice and zen. TV's really brought everything down. Or perhaps they eat dinner here and they have a nice bit of TV and dinner starts to take longer and longer. whilst they're watching their iPads at the table. And we can see how that really encourages that loss of sleep pressure, right? So that's what we want to focus on, is how can we keep our little ones' sleep pressure alive? Like, can we be playing, interacting, all of that sort of thing during that awake time? If they're in the car talking, whatever it is, little toys, or alternatively, of course, if they're due a nap, you want them to sleep, let them sleep, totally. But it's like a newborn. Parents say to me all the time, my newborn's like never sleeping. And I'm like, oh, they're sleeping. They're dozing on all those feeds. They're snack feeding, they're on and off, they're getting 5 minutes here and there, and they're counting that as their sleep. And that is the same. So before you consider dropping the last nap, you need to check sleep pressure. Before you consider dropping their only nap, check sleep pressure before nighttime. So if you're ever thinking things are getting really hard, bedtime's pushing really late, that sort of thing, please check, are they ready to transition? Please check that first. You must check that first and trial a bit more awake time first. It's so, so helpful. And for toddlers, it's also really helpful when it comes to those bedtime settles. It is like the number one. It's really important. Okay, so that's sort of around that day structuring and those awake times. Now, do we have any questions first up on day structuring or that side of things first? Because I'll get to those questions and then I'm going to talk all about the sleep settling, like a nighttime, frequent night waking and cat napping. Okay, but if we've got any questions around structuring, please let me know. Okay. Yep. So I'm going to cover the not to feed to sleep. I'm going to cover the self-settling side of things in just a moment. That's what we're moving on to next. And then we're going to move on to toddlers. 100% I'm going to cover that. So awesome. All right. I'm going to start with that. So when it comes to essentially any sort of night waking, frequent night waking, difficult settles, that sort of thing. Now, what this is primarily going to cover is little ones 2.5 and under who are in a cot. Okay. If you've got a toddler and they're in a bed or you're struggling with bedtime settles, definitely pay some attention to this because there's things that, will be so beneficial. But I will definitely get to that point next. So basically, when it comes to toddlers, when it comes to babes, and when we've got these frequent night wakings happening, or when they're relying on something external. So if your little one's got a dummy, if they're being rocked, if they're only feeding to sleep, if something is getting really difficult for your babe, essentially when it comes to that bedtime period or how to get them to sleep, you're having to play these big roles, that sort of thing. No. Tommy, he was coming to say goodnight to me, so that's probably why, because Scarlett just did. Oh, yeah. Were you in the window? Oh, okay. Go to bed now, darling. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. All right. Good night, sweetie. Thanks, darling. Okay. Good night. That's so good. It's their bedtime now. Well, it usually is about 7:45, so running a bit behind schedule. Um, Tommy. Yeah. Okay. So, no more in the window. Okay. You need to go to bed now. Okay, Dad. Okay. So basically this is what what happens is I told my husband he has football training tonight. I was like, we'll be fine. The kids they're big enough. They'll put themselves. So I said good night, but that they could have a little hangout time beforehand. So this is them like putting themselves to bed, which they wouldn't usually do. So basically, when it comes to the like resettling or that sort of thing, what happens at 4 months is that your little ones essentially their sleep cycles change and they become more defined. Now, during that, what happens is that they used to have like sleep cycles everywhere. They might have slept for 3 hours as a newborn, that sort of thing. But what actually happens when their sleep cycles become more defined, they come to an awakened point in between these sleep cycles. And that is just a safety thing to check everything is as it was when they fell asleep. What happens with the self-settling and the associations with falling off to sleep is that your little ones have become super reliant on a particular thing. It is not at all about like an attachment of if you don't replace the dummy 5 times a night, they're going to feel like you've left them and they're in a Russian orphanage and it's no good for them. Because you might find that, hey, I am done feeding to sleep, but I'm still happy to support them. But every time I do something else, like even if I'm rocking them or patting them, they're just losing it. If my partner goes in, they've lost it, at that point. And so, what I want you guys to recognize is that your little ones become really familiar to particular things. It's association, it's repetition, it's patterns. They are born to pick up on these things. That is what brings them a sense of security and safety and certainty in all their things, right? And so, what we sort of want to like look at is okay, my little ones have become used to particular things to get to sleep or back to sleep or that sort of thing. What happens is as they transition out of sleep cycles, and this is what causes the frequent night waking, they essentially go into off to sleep with one thing there. Then they've used, for example, the rock to sleep, right? This is the same for toddlers. If you are by the bed at the beginning of the night, mark my words, when they come out of certain sleep cycles, so they're drifting between these sleep cycles, it is simply to check everything is as it was when they fell asleep. That's why when little ones learn to self-settle or learn to toddlers go to sleep without you having to be there, more often than not, and there's like obviously there's certain things that might interfere, especially with toddlers, but they will essentially be able to recognize that everything is as it was and be able to drift into the next sleep cycle. And even if they did awaken, they know how to put themselves back off to sleep. When your little one relies on something external, being that you sit by the bed or feeding or rocking or that sort of thing, when they come out of these and it's gone, they think they need it again. And then they go back off to sleep. And then they come out of the next one, they think they need it again. And that's when you get the constant call outs. This is more prominent typically in the second half of the night because the first half we are naturally in a deeper sleep. So we're sort of here just drifting in the first half in this deeper sleep. Come the second half of the night, so this is our sleep part. These are the cycles they're coming into. In the second half of the night, however, what's happening is we're drifting in much lighter surface sleep in the second half of the night. And so they find it harder to get back off to sleep at these points, especially come the early hours of the morning, particularly for babes who are more tired. Okay. So what we want to look at is if our little one relies on us there, they're going to rely on us there. For some parents, they're like, but they don't rely on me. Like I don't really feed close to sleep, or nah, they can use the dummy themselves, or that sort of thing. What we often find is that little ones who are using external measures to get to sleep don't tend to get, sometimes they will, but for some little ones, they don't tend to get into those deeper, like sort of sleeps. They tend to stay in that lighter surface sleep. And so we really, really want to pay attention to um, that if we teach them to be able to not use those external measures, they're more likely to get into a better deep sleep, that sort of thing, and be able to transition. And if they do awaken, know how to get back off to sleep again. So, how do we change this? So, it's important to understand why it's happening. And, guys, it is not at all that we can't change this without, certain things coming into place. So, we can absolutely change this with comfort. We can change this with reassurance, all the things. Okay. So when it comes to making the changes, so when it comes to making any sort of changes around sleep, we always want to pay attention to that sleep pressure in the lead up. We want to make any changes from the beginning of the night time and have the right awake time before bedtime. So this is the same with toddlers. We start from the beginning of the night, the right awake time before bedtime, and make sure that they've got a good sleep pressure. From there, basically what we're going to be doing is looking at how we're going to change their pattern of relying on that particular thing. Now, when we make changes to any sort of anything for us as humans, it feels uncomfortable. It's like you get the tears, you get the pushbacks when it's toddlers, they're so used to that control around bedtime. It feels really uneasy for them to make changes, right? And it does for babes too. The reason why you can't sort of offer the same level of comfort or it doesn't sort of feel like you're doing much when you're making the change is actually because they've become really used to particular things. They've become really familiar for those particular things, and that is what they want because that is what they know. And so basically, when it comes to that, when it comes to this whole process, I recommend having ways that you can essentially, so with a feed to sleep, for example, if it's a dummy, people ask, can I wean a dummy? You could definitely, for example, you could rock to sleep if they're used to being rocked to sleep as well. If they're used to feeding and a dummy, you might feed and get rid of the dummy for a couple of days. But I don't typically recommend weaning a dummy as in using it at some points and not at others. That's usually a nightmare. For dummies, you're better off going cold turkey, but you can support in other more hands-on ways to begin with and then lessen those so you don't end up just swapping the prop. Because a lot of parents will sort of say, I got rid of the dummy, but now they're using my breast as a dummy all night, for example. So you want to make sure the feed comes away from sleep. So I would be feeding, for example, 15 minutes after they wake for the daytimes and maybe 40 minutes before bedtime. During the feeds, I would make sure that your babe's really engaged because remember that whole sleep pressure thing? We want to make sure that you're in that sleep pressure. So, in that lead up to bedtime, they're not getting drowsy or zoned out or losing that sleep pressure before we go and offer that ability to be able to go down without the feed and things like that, because that will give them that second wind and make for a really hard transition. So, we're keeping them really engaged in their lead up. And then essentially, we're offering support. And with the support, it's tricky because with the support, it's not tricky, sorry. It's a change. And I always want you to think of reassuring, not fixing to sleep. So comfort, not fix. So I'm going to comfort you, babe, because you're having a really hard time and we're changing this and this feels really uncomfortable and it's not what you know and it feels unsafe and you're so upset about it. So we're going to comfort, but we're not necessarily going to fix to sleep. Right. So for some families, they might sort of, and in our programs, we really go in depth as to which particular ways you can do this and troubleshoot with you and guide you along the way. But basically, you could do something that you're in the room and sort of weaning away. You could do, some people do sort of a pick up and put down, like they're cuddling. But again, they'll say, but it didn't sort of do much when I picked them up. And I often find pick up, put down can be very, very triggering for the little one and make them cry way more. Like it's very frustrating because they're trying to comfort, like they're trying to settle eventually. And then you put them down and then, they cry again. So you pick them up and then it can blow out. What I would say is confidence and calmness to know that during this change process is going to feel really icky and unsafe and unfamiliar. And they also are used to crying. And then you come in and do X, Y, and Z. But I'm here for them still. And that might be stepping in and out frequently, like really frequently. It might be being in the room and weaning away. But my job is not to fix to sleep in that moment. It's just to continue that support for them whilst they learn a new way of going off to sleep. Because once they start to adjust and find their new way, it is magic and they can become really, really good at it. And then you can lessen the part that you're essentially playing as they're starting to learn these things and this process. And that's really, really important. If your little one is sort of 4.5 months onwards, one feed a night in the second half of the night. On other wakings, I'd be looking at a resettle. If your little one is between 3 to 4.5 months, you might do 2 feeds, but say 4 hours apart, for example. So we'd look at that and we'd look at that resettling. Now, when it comes to day naps and cat naps take the longest to see settle. So once you start to get your little one used to the resettles at nighttime, going down independently, understanding what it is to be awake in their sleep space and how to go off to sleep and also get into those deeper sleep cycles, it is so much easier for them to transition in between cat naps because it's really hard for a babe who cat naps who doesn't know how to go to sleep at the beginning of the sleep cycle without you or something external like a dummy. Plus, they're more likely to stay on light surface sleep and not get into a deeper sleep rhythm. But it's really hard if we expect them to go back to sleep when they can't even be expected to know how to go to sleep without those things. And so what happens is when your little one wakes from a short nap, by the time you have to go in and re-implement things or do things, often by that stage it's too late. That sort of the ship sailed, at that point for the extension. So or you have to do quite like, you're then sort of stuck under them for the extended contact nap and things like that. What we want to do is teach them how to go down at the beginning so that they then know how to transition through that sleep cycle and they're more likely to get into a better sleep rhythm. And that's what is also the magic in that second half of the night. They're able to understand how to get into those sleep cycles and how to then transition through those and resettle back off to sleep. So that's what we want. We want that idea for them. That is how we teach them. And it's through consistent comfort. It's through getting that lead up right. That lead up to bedtime matters. A lot of times people don't focus on sleep pressure. They don't look at essentially the awake times and looking what's happening on the feeds. Are the feeds really dragged on? Are they, getting really drowsy on them? And that can really impact that change process for you guys. So that's sort of what I recommend when it comes to that during the night, the resettle and the cat napping is so important. So when they are learning that, I would go from the beginning of the night and then carry that method, or the practice into the next day as well from there. So does anyone have questions around that baby sleep part? Please feel free to answer those. And then what I'm going to do is then we'll go into toddler sleep and that sort of thing. So yeah, let's take a look. Okay, so Anonymous has written with I think it's for a friend. And basically her little one gets up on hands and knees. So for that question, I've definitely answered how we can get it. It's not about what you do to resettle, it's about them learning to initially settle and then managing the resettle. And sometimes, guys, the roles that we're playing. So for example, for toddlers, parents don't realize how much they're banking on the parent just being down the hall or knowing that they're just hanging down the hall. And that can be exactly what they're then using as their prop and then waking up for as well. So, I would also, the reason I knew this little one had a dummy before you even said it because she's waking so frequently. It's very rare, maybe feeding, like if they're constantly on the breast, but it's for a rocked baby, so rock to sleep, it's very rare that they're up every 30 to 60 minutes. That's dummy problem. So the dummy is a huge part of this issue here, a big part of the issue. And so what I would sort of do is look at that beginning. I would absolutely be getting rid of that dummy. You could do some other comfort to begin with, but then I would be getting rid of the dummy from there. So basically, exactly what I spoke about is going to be the big change here. And then also making sure that, just looking at that, in terms of would I lay them down continuously? No, often you'll just find that it makes it worse. And I would always be assessing, guys, am I making this better or worse at the moment? Is the comfort that I'm doing actually helping, or am I just better off being just here, just present, but quieter, or doing sort of less, like not hanging over the cot, trying to not entering into that whole like chaos, but actually just being a very confident, very present, sense of comfort for them. I would only lay them down every now and then. Even if it was a separation anxiety thing, which it's not, that this 30 to 60-minute waking and all of that, the whole like I need to do this and then they go back off to sleep, that's habitual waking. That's just what they think they need is now missing, etc., etc. So that's really, really important to make sure that we recognize that. And if it was separation anxiety, the little one would learn that the parent is still there anyway, but it's not typically when it comes to this such frequent waking. Oh, thank you, Marie. Oh, perfect. Yeah, and Marie, like it's so common. So Marie's got a new little one, and did baby sleep program with the first, so that's beautiful. But basically, in terms of like getting out and about, listen, I would say if you can try and be home for nap one, if that's easier, be home for nap one. I mean, if you can ever be home for nap one and two, amazing. Head out for nap three and four. If you can't, and you can only be home for nap one, head out for nap two and three. That sort of thing. So absolutely, I'd say if you can practice one or two naps at home, that would be great. Practicing the later naps of the day at home isn't usually the best option. As in, I'd rather like it's easier. It's a much easier process to try and get them to practice the earlier naps. But and if there's times where you can't be home all morning, no worries. The goal is then just to actually get them to sleep so that you're not in a huge overtired cycle by the end of the day. Warren's asked, how often should my 9-month-old be going feeding overnight? So definitely once a night is absolutely perfect. Your little one, I'm assuming, would be on solids, even if they're not on great solids. To be honest, the more they feed overnight, the more issues we tend to find with solids during the daytime. They just have a way more limited appetite for those for the like uptake of solids. So one feed a night. The rest would be comfort. Now, a lot of people say to me, but it's not comfort because they're actually still feeding, which I understand, but it's still it's getting them back to sleep. Oh no, Rachel, sorry. I didn't mean it was easier to drop the feed to sleep than rocking. What I meant is that when made those comparisons, it's really just an observation that we've made here is that if somebody writes on a contact me form, my baby is waking up every 45 minutes at night time, that real frequent like waking is often the dummy. Whereas if like if a little one is rocked to sleep, it's not always the case. Some babes are rocked to sleep and they still wake hourly. I was just sort of saying often the dummy just induces like such like that real frequent crazy amount of waking. So now in saying that, if you're dropping the feed to sleep or the rocking to sleep, same, like it's still going to be a process. It's still an adjustment, that sort of thing. So it's not really that one is necessarily harder or easier. Oh, Marie, no worries. So I would say if you can, and you're also going to get this to watch back, guys. So, but I would say if you can try and be home for nap 1 and 2, magic some days, and then be out for the afternoon. If you can't be home for nap 1, maybe try and be home for nap 2, and then you can go out for nap 4, 2 and 3, and you be out for nap 4. Nap 1 and 2 are your ideals where possible, but if you need to go out for others, then that's obviously no problems at all. So that's completely okay as well. So just whatever you can make work, for sure. So let's get into, okay, now we're going to get into toddlers. So when we talk about toddlers sleep, the first thing, and like I'm so passionate about toddler sleep and the behavioral side of things because I feel like it's so confusing out there. There's so much nowadays. I feel like we've gone from really authoritative parenting. I feel like there's a huge mix of dynamics between the way that dads would parent a toddler as opposed to the way that anyone else would, as in the mum might, not anyone else, the mum might parent that toddler, for example. And it gets really, really confusing. Or we've gone from really authoritative parenting to now like super gentle parenting, that sort of thing, right? So basically, what I want to look at when it comes to toddlers is in order for us to be able to keep our toddlers in a position where the bedtimes can stay on track, that sort of thing, firstly, we have to look at that sleep pressure. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that they've got enough awake time before that bedtime. So, usually from around 2 and a bit onwards, they need up to around 6 hours awake time, up to that 3-year-old mark. So, guys, if you've got a 2-year-old who only needs 5 hours awake time, like no problems. But essentially, I want you guys to keep an eye on the fact that they might be getting ready for more, needing more awake time, which might mean capping naps, or if they're sleeping through till 7 a.m., which most toddlers aren't, don't worry. It might mean waking them, that sort of thing. So basically, what I want you to always look at when it comes to toddlers and that toddler sleep side of thing is where in that lead up to bedtime is how much expenditure are they getting? So are they able to get all of that energy out? Like in the first 7 years, they are in energy. Like they are just that there's like they need to burn all of that energy. Are they getting opportunities to get that second wind in the lead up to bedtime? The next thing is where is our connection at in the lead up to bedtime? So the way that we have authority in parenting is through attachment. So think like double A, right? Authority is given through attachment when there's no attachment or when the attachment is low or that sort of thing. So if you think connect to direct, but when when that attachment side of things is low, the ability to be able to bring in authority around bedtimes or things like that, it makes it really tricky. Now, what tends to happen, and especially because we've got, we're daycare parents, for example, like we're dual income parents, like we're working, all those things. What tends to happen is that we get into these cycles of, and even to be honest, even if we're at home all day, every day with our toddlers, we just get into this cycle of like, the doing. So we like, done lunch and then we pack away and then we do this and then, that sort of thing. But I really want us to ask, like, how much actual time have we spent like present with our toddler? And a lot of people might think like, oh, this sounds like it's going to be too hard. I'm going to have to give more time to them and that sort of thing. It's really not about that. It's really about looking at like, where's my present time with them? Have I spent 15 minutes of actual saturated time, no phone around, no TV on in the background, truly actually soaking myself in them, saturated time with them, especially if we haven't had much time with them that day or things have been a bit busy, because they will seek that attachment or that connection and or that attention at other points. So we really want to look at that first, like how much time have I had to be able to have that attachment and that connection before bedtime, and has it been true? Has it been I've actually been present with them, that sort of thing. The next thing is we want to look at that lead up to bedtime, so we're checking that sleep pressure. But when we look at that lead up to bedtime, we really want to pay attention to, in terms of the lead up to bedtime, are we just handing out 5 boring requests in the lead up to a boring old bedtime? It's not like you were like, do these 3 boring things, brush your teeth, get your pajamas on, da, da, da. Like, it's not like we're doing those 3 things and then they're getting to it like, at the end of a rainbow at the end of it. And now like, now getting to bed. So you do all these things when you're the most tired, they all suck, and now you go off to bed, you know? So it's really important to make sure that we're essentially finding them first. We're meeting them where they're at rather than them always having to come to us. We're meeting with them where they're at, and we're like, hey, bud, I can see you're playing with this, or you got your toys or your trains or whatever. Why don't we take the train and go brush the train's teeth? Like, or I'm going to bring in your toothbrush tonight into this room and we're going to do it here. And then, and then we'll go off and that sort of thing. You can also use a stamp chart, which I will send in an email. And that stamp chart is not a reward stamp chart. What it is they can write, put on there, choose, or you can write, but they can essentially say the lead up to bedtime. So it might be that you have books and have a cup of milk or whatever it is in the lead up to bedtime, brush teeth, that sort of thing. And they get to put a stamp as they do each activity. Now, what that does is it gives them a sense of autonomy. It gives them a sense that they're in control. They're not, but it gives them a sense. And then at the same time, it's a bit of a distraction from their usual means of taking control at that point and starting all the requests and that sort of thing. And so by giving them that chart, it does just add a sense of distraction and excitement in that lead up to bedtime. And it can be really, really helpful. So we want to make sure that we use that. Now, from there, once we've done that sort of stamp chart, I want you to mix up that lead up to bedtime. I want you to find opportunities in that lead up to bedtime to be a bit silly, to make it a bit more fun, to do it a little bit differently. As much outdoor evening time as you can possibly do with your toddlers will immensely help their circadian rhythm. It actually is building up that melatonin. The screens are doing the opposite. They're building up all their awake hormones, they're killing off melatonin. And not just that, they're keeping your little one suspended. So all of that energy is building up, and we turn off the screens, and the behavior and all of the stuff needs to come back out after that, right? And so that's why we tend to find like then parents find that real hard time after screens go off, because it's just like, ugh, it just all comes out once the screens go off. And we don't want that, right? We don't want that in that lead up to bedtime. That just makes your job so much harder. So it just works like in such a counterproductive way, typically when it comes to bedtime. Plus, then, of course, they're missing out on that attachment and that connection time. And especially if we're like, okay, we get home from daycare, and guys, don't feel bad. Oh my gosh, we've all got like stuff up to here. There's so much going on, all of that sort of stuff. But it's important just to recognize these things so we can move forward and be like, I'm going to do this a little bit differently, or, that sort of thing. So that's really, really important, for them and for us to recognize in that lead up to bedtime. It's a little bit dim. I hope you guys can see me okay. But yeah, I'm just going to move this light actually. So we want to make sure that in that lead up to bedtime, we've really be able to tick some of these boxes off, and being able to find that attachment, because when you connect, you can direct. When you're in authority, when you're in attachment, you have authority. When you don't, we don't, right? And we have to remember this moving forward. Now, the next thing is that when our little ones feel that they are controlling that lead up to bedtime, we've given them the reins, right? So we've now put them in the driver's seat, because they've been requesting things, and we took shortcuts in that moment of just being like, yep, just get it done. Yep, I just one more drink. I'd sell my soul, just go to bed, so to speak. So what's one more drink? What's one more book? All of those things. But what happens is that toddlers push doors they don't want to open. And so anytime you find yourself taking a shortcut, and when I call it a shortcut, I know nothing's actually shortcuts in parenting life, but when you find yourself just appeasing something quickly, throwing screens at it, whatever you need to do in that lead up, whenever you find that that's the case, I want you to remember this is the long way around. Okay. So the short way is ultimately the long way, because you will deal with that either once it goes off, as the behaviors tend to exacerbate, once they start doing it, in shopping, like whatever it is, right? You will notice that suddenly you're like not in control of a lot anymore. And what seemed to be just this quick thing here or this quick thing here tends to exacerbate and unravel. So when you take the longer way around and you think, no, we're not going to just fix that with screen, or no, we're going to do this, this way, or I'm going to take a little time to have a play before we go off and brush teeth. That's what I really want you to keep an eye on, right? Because those things are what essentially makes parenting a million times easier and quicker, and all the good, all the things, right? and also just builds a really bloody good foundation for a good relationship for life. So that's really important. So basically, what I want you to do is we've essentially then got this lead up to bedtime. As soon as your little ones start controlling in that lead up to bedtime, we must understand that that control essentially brings them a lot of unease. It is a lot of angst and all of that sort of thing because toddlers aren't meant to be driving the car. They're not meant to be in the pilot seat, right? And so the more that they feel like they're in that position of being in the driver's seat, the more that they need to control it even more, right? Because they can't, like, we've sort of let those reins go. And so the only way that they're bringing themselves a sense of safety and security now is by controlling it even more. And so what I want you guys to remember is that it's actually boundaries are important. How we hold them is important because we don't want to damage that connection in the meantime. So your child wants to do a particular thing. You say, no, 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 we've done that already. We're moving on to the next thing from there. That is the boundary. The more you are stressing about that boundary, so the more, for example, that you sort of go, oh, should I do that? Like, oh, blah, blah, and you stuck on that boundary. Maybe later you start negotiating, you're really entering into that boundary chat instead of moving past that thing that you've held, the worse that this gets, right? So what I want you to do is be like, this is the boundary. And then we empathize. I know it feels really, I know you didn't want that to be my answer. And I know you want another drink, but we've already had a couple of drinks, etc., etc. So the more that you feel like that, the more I want you to then be like, okay, I'm going to empathize with my little one. They're allowed to get all their big feelings out. They're not allowed all behaviors, but they're allowed all of their feelings around that. So, guys, just give me 1 second, 1 sec. Okay, just having a little coughing fit. Sorry, guys. So basically, the more yeah, so basically, the boundaries there, their reaction, their action, their big feelings are welcome out. We welcome them out. Okay. They're allowed to have those big feelings. It doesn't mean something's wrong with them. It doesn't mean if I don't like nip it in the bud now, I'm gonna have a spoiled brat and I'm gonna have a soft boy because they're crying or whatever it is, right? In fact, the more that you encourage them, the more they see that they're not scaring you with those big feelings, you're not making them shut them all down, the more they'll just come out and get out quicker and be done with it. So if you're stuck on holding the boundary, you're negotiating, you're making it like this and that, and you're, entering into all the dialogue around the boundary, you're stuck at step one. The boundary is the boundary. Pick your boundaries. Don't pick the small crappy stuff. Pick your boundary. Then you go, I'm going to empathize with you now because this feels really crappy and you wanted that and you have autonomy and you have, all the right to be able to, want certain things. You're a child, right? I want things. I still find it disappointing when I can't have things. And then from there, once you've empathized and once you've been compassionate about that, then we move into a space essentially from there of so we've sort of done the empathy side of things. Then essentially they will move into a space of being able to like that'll move into feelings. So from the so what you'll see at the beginning is more surface stuff. So it'll be frustration, it'll be anger, it'll be all of those things. But once you get through and you empathize, you'll move them into the feeling. And the feeling is then a bit of sadness, disappointment, that sort of thing. Maybe it'll be something that's not even related. In fact, a lot of times, then they'll be like, I'm so hungry, or like at school today, all the things, right? And often you can predict. So a part of our job is also to be able to be like, I recognize when I do this, like X, Y, and Z happens, like I recognize when my little one is really tired or that sort of thing. Then X, Y, and Z, like this ends up happening, right? So I really want you guys to pay attention to that as well in the lead up to bedtime and really be able to pinpoint the things that you feel are definitely making things better or worse at that point. And so basically from there, then we're moving into the next activity. And you might be like, sweetie, like, let's go and do this together now. And at the start, it might take a little bit longer to get through the bedtime routine because they're having their big feelings and you've held the boundary, but it will get so much easier. Now, if your little one is relying on you to sit next to them, right, when it comes to bedtime, so if they're relying on you to, we need to get you to a point where you're moving away. So Even if they're relying on you to stay near or that sort of thing, we need to get you to a point where you're moving away from them in that space. Because for as long as they need you there at the beginning to any capacity, even if you're reading books and they're getting drowsy and they're starting to disassociate you with the falling asleep part, or they still have milk bottles or things like that, that will still remain problematic. So again, where if we're getting rid of milk bottles or getting rid of milk near bed, we've put it into a cup, we've moved it well away from sleep. We've then moved through with the boundaries and with that lead up to bedtime, kind, considerate boundaries. It feels really big for them to trust you. They tried trusting you before and you let all the, like, not you did, but like, and the boundaries got let go. So we need to move into a space essentially where we've held the boundary and then we go into that lead up, into that bedtime period, for example. And so then from there, what I want you to do is basically, if you're stuck with them in the bed, you bring something from out. So you bring a chair and you'd move that away. Now, a lot of people will say, I've tried things like that. I've returned them back to, their bed 56 times a night, that sort of thing. But basically, what I want you to do is just remember that there has to be a bit of a boundary in place. So with that boundary in place, my partner's just back from footy. So with that boundary in place, what I want you to do is remember that when it comes to that bedtime routine, I'm happy to be here, but you need to lay quietly. If you keep laying quietly, I'm going to step out for a moment, or there has to be some sort of currency in that moment. There has to be a boundary. If you know, keep kicking your legs up and down or running around in the room, I'm not going to be here for a moment. I'm stepping out for a moment because I'm happy to be here, but on my terms. I'm going to provide you support, but not to be an audience to a performance. Right. And so, really looking at those things and then how, moving away to a point where we can essentially say goodnight and then step away completely. That is what then essentially invokes a way better nighttime period as well. Because when they wake up during the nighttime, they are essentially awake, but then they know how to go back off to sleep again. Nothing is missing or changed from when they fell asleep. And that is what brings about that magic sleep. And so then you'd move to a point where you might just check back in a few times. So you're getting away from that sitting right by the bed, you're getting rid of the chair after a few days, then you're just going to check back, that sort of thing, right? Having a really good currency in place, like that action and the reaction or that sort of thing, is going to be really important as well. Alrighty. So I am going to get through some questions now. And I will just let you guys know we have a baby sleep program and a toddler sleep program. Both of them have and we work one-on-one with clients as well, where I'm calling each day for 2 weeks to check in and see how everything's going. But I just want to quickly let you know about our programs as well. Our toddler sleep program is $159 or $169. That's terrible. I can't think off the top of my head. And the baby's $197, and we're doing 20% off for you guys. So I'll send that in an email tomorrow. But it means everything's sorted. You have literally the how-tos on everything: daycare sleep, travel, the lot. It's unreal. So you guys, I will send a link. I will send the recording tomorrow for you guys to watch back at any point. And yeah, so I'm just going to answer some questions. Yeah. So Anonymous has written the same sort of idea. So 3-year-old waking up multiple times a night, goes to sleep at 8. I would say 8 might be too late if there's no nap. If there's no nap, I'd have my little one in bed. I mean, for a 3-year-old, ideally at 6:30 if no nap, but that's totally realistic for many fams. So it might even be starting with 7:30 just to bring it forward, definitely, and then working to 7 o'clock. Um, yeah, and the thing is that your little one will only go back to sleep with that sit and cuddle. So it's about moving that away a little bit, and you're going to have some pretty firm boundaries with that, but make sure that you're meeting those connection points in the lead up to bedtime as well. Yeah, so Rose, your little one is still relying on the external measures to get to sleep. So that's what's triggering the wake ups as well. And definitely you could go at 12, at 1, tend to say like no feeds a night is great. Yeah. So Emily, they have don't finish till late, 6 p.m., 3-year-old, 15-minute drive, 15-minute, the last 15 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So Emily, in terms of laying there for an hour, I would say that even if you're present in the lead up and you switch things and things like that, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute, you're still going to have that bedtime period. And so I would be checking the sleep pressure. I would be checking what's happening with the nap. And then I would be checking what's happening in that hour. Is there a lot of dialogue, talking, they're mucking around, you're watching, all of that sort of stuff. In terms of the connection side of thing, dinner, no screens, beautiful time for connection. In fact, I'm reading this book. It is so wonderful. And it talks all about the fact that now, because our little ones are in daycare from young, and also we're in school young and we're doing so much socially, it's just a completely different lifestyle now, that children are becoming more peer raised. So their attachment is landing closer to peers instead of parents, right? And one of the most important parts of this change and of what we as parents want to introduce is times where we collect our kids back from their peers, because we don't want peers to raise our children. That is where we have no authority. They become peer attached, and peer attachment is addressed, like the connections that they're getting met in peer attachment is based on close likeness, so looks and likeness, like becoming like them. Whereas parent attachment is based on unconditional love, empathy, knowing them for exactly what they are, communication, like all those things, right? So peers are important, but we want parents to stay forefront. So when you've been apart from them, when you have moments and, creating in that bedtime routine, collecting your kids, bringing them back to you, being in their face, saturating, all of that is so important. So dinner time is wonderful for that. No phones at the table, no screens on, just being amongst each other. Bath time, perfect. Can you have a shower together at like certain nights? If you bath them, can you sit there and really play with them during that time? And then, yep, another maybe 10 minutes of play somewhere if you want. But you can actually weave a lot of connection and collecting your children back in that bedtime routine anyway. Yeah. So, Maddie, we can definitely help with this one. That would be changing the beginning of the night. So you still need to address the beginning of the night and then make the return, but with the idea that you're moving away and lessening what you're doing when you are having to stay there. Yeah. So Jennifer, fine, no worries. Do solids first then, but then do the milk at least an hour away, or about an hour away from naps, and 40 minutes or 45 minutes away from bedtime and wide awake on it. Yeah. So I'm going to touch on screen time just really quickly, because um, Lisa just asked about screen time and does it like stalls bedtime. So there's other reasons why bedtime stalls. And I understand that tech's coming in, but we know the research around technology and children, and screens and children. It doesn't matter if it's big screen, small screen, any screen. Big screens are better than small screens, in terms of all the research and the detriments that are coming out for children, 3-year-olds and stuff, like, on iPads. But what I would say is absolutely, not only are you going to be experiencing loss of melatonin, you're also getting loss of connection. You're also getting loss of all the good things, the wonder, imagination, the play, the finding gross motor skills, the problem solving, the critical thinking, the social skills, all of that is essentially going to the wayside for so many children. But you're getting essentially a real deep loss of expenditure as well. So their ability to play and expend energy and move their bodies. So that sort of thing really impacts it. But the research now on children's ability to be able to follow instructions and focus and concentration because of screens. So for children under 3 years of age, every hour of screen per day increases their chance of attention disorders by 10%. It's that crazy. Like it really matters when it comes to being able to listen and follow and actually like be in their body and listen and take that instruction and move forward with things. And so it does, it impacts all of it. So whilst I'd say, yep, there's other things, it could be boundaries, it could be, there could be a number of things there. I just think in general, now we know so much about screens. It's honestly just so important to be like, do we need to lessen our load? Do we need to schedule less at other points? Like, what can we do to really sort of nurture and help this process for our little ones? Yeah, so early morning waking is typically either milk too close to bed, they're using something to get to sleep or back to sleep, so they're not self-settling or they're using a dummy, they're cold, something that you're doing is enticing them to get up. When they do get up, they get screens, they get milk, they, that sort of thing. How we manage that resettle is really important as well. I always say, Sarah's asked, can we use the floor or do we have to use the chair? I love the use of a chair because it's moving out of the room and then it's gone. So it makes it more of a defined thing. So no pictures, background screens are also now known for the same for similar focus and attention issues, because when a child's playing, they get distracted and they cannot focus. Background screens, no, but music on in the background, no worries. I would just always say, if you can also have lots of moments of silence in the house, like, I know that's impossible, but like where there isn't excess, because often like our children are overstimulated. And so if we don't need all the extra, try and just lessen it a little bit, but of course, anything like that is totally okay. So, guys, I wanted to say a huge thank you for joining me. I hope that everyone has gotten a lot out of tonight. You will get an email tomorrow. Thank you again for joining me. It's such a pleasure to play this role, and I hope that you've gotten something out of it. So, that's it from me. Big love to everyone, and thank you again. Bye, guys. Bye.